Welcome to Tales of Wells Harbour, presented by me, Robert Smith, the Wells Harbour Master, and produced by Amy Hendry with the support of the Wells Harbour Commissioners. This episode is called The Masters Who Shaped the Harbour. Unfortunately, during this podcast, I cannot mention all the harbour masters who have served Wells Harbour, but I hope you enjoy hearing about a few of the more colourful characters. Some of the earliest references to the harbour being governed by individuals started back to the early 1500s, where the harbour was administered by officers of the manorial court, who were responsible for keeping the harbour clear, maintaining the buoys and beacons, and enforcing the laws. They also had jurisdiction over the collection of port dues, which at this time were 2 pennies per boat for anchorage, and 3 pennies per boat for measurage. They also dealt with minor quarrels and disturbances in the harbour. Actually, this doesn't sound like much has changed since those days. One quarrel was that 2 ladies, Beatrice Loads and Margaret Furry, were fined 3 shillings and 4 pennies each for collecting oysters within the haven of Wells before the date of the 14th of September and selling to foreigners. These foreigners were in the village of Walsingham, only 5 miles away. In the late 1500s, 2 of the wealthiest ship owners and shipbuilders in Norfolk, Ambrose Fisk and William Saab, were appointed with 3 others to tighten up the daily workings of the Port of Wells. But this raises the question of who appointed them. Apparently, it was the governing body based in King's Lynn, called the Commissioners for Havens and Creeks, which suggests to me that during this period, Wells Harbour was administrated by the Port of King's Lynn. Till the mid-1600s, following the Act of Parliament being passed of the formation of the Wells Harbour Commissioners for repairing and better preserving the quay and port of Wells. One of the first tasks was to appoint Robert Pearson as the haven man for Wells, the forerunner of today's harbour master. Pearson was paid 1 penny per ton for his pains and labour. Pearson held the post until his death in 1672. However, the records are still somewhat sketchy, and we cannot find a predecessor until 1732, when Nicholas Everett was appointed the Wells haven man. The first reference we see to a harbour master is John Powditch, aged 40 in 1782, following the embankment of the Warren Slade Mast by Sir John Turner that closed off the old haven near the church from the sea. It sounds that the harbour was struggling for a time during the early 1800s. A local newspaper cutting reads, "The Harbour," and quotes, "Of all the dull, lifeless meetings held in Wells, those of the Harbour Commissioners are usually the worst. The reason is not far to seek. The shipping trade has so declined, the income is barely sufficient for the harbour's upkeep." However, in 1839, a Mr. Robinson Parker is appointed as harbour master, and plans are afoot for a new stone quay to be built. But unfortunately, all is not plain sailing, as Robinson Parker is dismissed from his appointment as harbour master in 1844, and is angry. He leads a protest on behalf of 13 merchants and ship owners and many Welsh traders who laid a petition before the House of Commons, alleging mismanagement. An inquiry was set up, and the Commissioner's account books and records were scrutinised. The inquiry uncovered major concerns in the way payments and receipts were made with the building of the new quay. Following this inquiry, a new harbour master, Mr. John Parker, was elected, and it seemed that the protests were resolved when the sum of 6,000 was borrowed on the security of future harbour dues, which equates to just shy of £1 million today. With the new quay built, the port was flourishing, and in the 1860s, we see Harbour Master John Smith appointed on a salary of £24 per year. This equates to roughly £3,500 in today's money. Under his command, he has 9 pilots and the Wells Harbour limits extend 13 miles to the west of Wells and 5 miles to the east. These limits would include other small harbours like Burnham Overy, Brancaster, and possibly even Farnham. In the Harbour Commissioner's archives of today, there is an old worn-out notice compiled by the Harbour Master John Smith called Rules of the Port of Wells, showing 12 orders. To quote just a few, all masters of vessels to apply to the Harbour Master for ballast, and all vessels coming in ballast to deposit the same where the Harbour Master shall direct. No fires allowed for heating pitch, tar, or other purposes on the common quay or landing places without leave of the Harbour Master. No master or pilot should be allowed to moor any vessel in the channel with their own anchors unless under the low water mark to the satisfaction of the Harbour Master. No cart or wagon of any description will be allowed to pass or stand nearer than 12 feet from the edge of the quay, for a fine of 2 shillings and sixpence for every such offence. Any master or mate neglecting to apply with the orders of the Harbour Master will be subject to a penalty of a fine of £5. Any master, mate, seaman, porter, or other person interfering with the Harbour Master whilst in the execution of his duties will be subject to a penalty of £20. That equates to just over £3,000 a day. I hope some of my fishermen are listening to this. And that's just a few of the rules that were mentioned in 1860. After many years of service, Smith decided to make the bold decision to immigrate to Australia. It transpired that he made the long trip successfully and landed in Williamstown, Australia, where he found employment building the Melbourne Jail. Following this, he moved to the township of Geelong, where he became a successful farmer. In 1880, we find ourselves with John Smith in pastures new, and John Elsden is appointed Harbour Master. But temporarily, while his brother Robert was delayed at sea after being appointed Harbour Master, John stood in till Robert's return a few months later. But the unfortunate twist in the tale was Robert took up his post in late July, only to serve as a Harbour Master for a few short months, as the brothers were both lost with 10 other members of the Wells lifeboat crew in October 1880 when the lifeboat capsized during a service launch to assist the Ocean Queen east of Wells Harbour entrance. This is a podcast all of its own for another day. Following the tragic loss in 1880, William Temple, who was the captain of the ship Herbert, was appointed Harbour Master in 1881. Temple held the post for 27 years, and during his long tenure, he regularly appears in the Wells Harbour Commissioner's records. On one such occasion, he is instructed to cut up and remove the wreck of a ship called the Hickman, which is a hazard near the channel entrance. The harbour account books show where he and 6 others are being paid for many months to remove the hazard at low water, with the means of a horse and cart to remove the wreckage. To this day, there is still occasionally wreckage from the Hickman that appears in this area. In 1908, there is an announcement posted for the appointment of a new Harbour Master. It reads, "Notice is hereby given that in consequence of a resignation of Captain William Temple, the Commissioners will at a meeting be held at the Crown Hotel, Wells, on Wednesday the 1st of July, 1908 at 11 a.m, will proceed to appoint a new Harbour Master. The salary is to be £20 per annum, including supervision of the banks." Following this notice, Captain Robert Green was appointed Harbour Master. The life of Captain Green was a colourful one, and serves as a warning that even the most experienced sailors can fall foul to Wells Harbour entrance. He has sailed from the port for 40 years, but on the 3rd of August, 1900, he's just missed the chance to cross over the bar as the tide was too low. In the early hours of the following day, a severe gale blew, and with his anchors dragging, the ship blew towards the harbour entrance, where it grounded and filled with water, leaving him and his crew clinging to the rigging for several hours, until being rescued by the Wells lifeboat. The vessel became a total wreck, and being too traumatized to return to sea, Captain Green began working ashore, working mussel and oyster beds alongside his good friend William Temple, who he then succeeded as harbour master in 1909. Just before the start of the First World War, we have the longest serving harbour master to this day, called Frank Tender Smith, being in post for 43 years. One of Tender Smith's first tasks was to employ 20 men to move sand from the channel that was causing a hazard to shipping in an area called Cool Sands. This came about after a local steam tug hit the sands while towing a ship towards Walker's Jetty. The jetty was destroyed in the incident. In the early 1920s, a harbour notice is posted by Tender, offering a £3 reward. The notice reads, "Where's the Fairway Boy has recently broke adrift from its moorings. The Wells Harbour Commissioners hereby offer a reward of £3 to any person who may recover the cable and chain, which is attached to the Fairway Boy stone, and place a suitable buoy on the cable so as to indicate the position of the Fairway Boy mooring. This offer will remain in force up to and including the 31st day of March." Following this notice, the harbour account book showed Tender Smith hiring a bicycle at 6 shillings and sixpence for a journey to Cly to arrange the collection of the Fairway Boy that had gone adrift. This always makes me laugh, just picturing him having to hire a rickety old bike, cycle all the way to Cly, a distance of 11 miles, along the old bumpy roads, pay the fee, only then to cycle all the way back again. It must have taken him all day. I always wonder, where did he stop for his lunch? And I hope his bike had lights. Anyhow, after arriving at Cly, he met Mr. Long of Blakeney, who had salvaged the buoy and towed it to Blakeney quayside for collection. Long was paid the sum of 2 shillings and 5 pence for the recovery, and if I made today's money, all these costs for the recovery of the buoy, equivalent to just under £70. Makes me wonder how much the buoy must have been worth. Tender was one of the most prominent personalities in the town during his time as harbour master. During the 1953 floods, he took part in an act of bravery when he and 2 other Wells men risked their lives to rescue the local chief officer of the Coast Guard, who was marooned at the lookout. He took a small dinghy and rowed during the storm to the beach to rescue the Coast Guard. For this he was awarded the BEM and was presented with a certificate for bravery. Tender was always a very modest man, and many incidents during his term as harbour master called for risk. But when this was mentioned, his reply was always, "That's what I'm here for. I'm only doing my duty." Officially, he never retired, as he was still in post when he died in 1956 at the age of 73. With massive shoes to fill, we see Frank Doodles Taylor continuing his links with Wells and the sea and becoming harbour master. During the Second World War, Frank won the DSM for his work as a naval commando, helping to smuggle secret agents ashore and working on midget submarines. Already being employed as harbour pilot, where he would steer the 500-ton plus ships to the quayside, sometimes cramming as many as 8, doubled up along the harbour wall. During one particular year, there were 200 grain ships recorded entering the port, which is probably a record. From my own personal point of view, I will always look on Frank in awe. He was a great friend of my grandfather, and as a small boy, I can remember listening to him and my grandfather and being fascinated by the stories I used to hear. He was not a big man in stature, but he was a giant amongst other men, so highly respected by everyone who knew him. Finally, we get to my mentor, the late Graham Walker, MBE, a Wells Harbour master and lifeboat coxswain that was no doubt, in my view, second to none. As a young man, I was taken under his wing and taught not just how to become a harbour master, but how to become a man. For now, Graham and our time together and how I became harbour master is a podcast all of its own for another day in the future. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. Maybe this has inspired you to visit the coast, to enjoy the fresh air and freedom.